Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Wilma Hodges from Longsight, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the Gradebook Enhancement Project, and we're fortunate enough to have the project team here with us to demo the planned enhancements and answer questions about the project. So before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping details. Our presentation today is being recorded. I'll be sending out that link to the recording after the event so you can view it on YouTube. The YouTube channel is www.youtube.com/SakaiCLE, and you can also catch some of our previous sessions there if you've missed any of them. As we go through the session, please go ahead and post your questions in the question area. Our speakers will address some of them during the presentation, and then if we have more, we can address them at the end during the Q&A portion. So if you have any questions you want to ask, go ahead and get them in. Even if we don't address them right away, we'll get to them later in the presentation. You can also post comments and questions on Twitter if you prefer, and just use the hashtag Sakai Showcase, and I'll be monitoring the Twitter feed to see if any questions come in that way. If you have any follow-up questions from today's webinar, please feel free to contact me, Wilma@longsight.com. So let me go ahead and introduce our presenters. We have with us today Kyle Blythe. He's a project analyst at New York University. He works with project teams to gather requirements and provide functional expertise. Kyle has also provided technical support, guidance, and training to faculty and staff at NYU. Payten Giles began his IT life as a software developer supporting the Australian government juggernaut. In doing so, he discovered an unusual affinity with JavaScript, which has since led to job titles that include the words interface designer and developer in no particular order. He's developed web applications for local and federal government, libraries, and universities, and is currently a freelancer contributing to open source projects like Sakai and ArchiveSpace. Jim Mezzanotte has been involved with Sakai for the last 6 years. He focuses on improving Sakai user experience, providing user guidance for faculty and students, as well as for Sakai administrators. Jeff Pasch is a project manager for NYU's instance of Sakai. He works closely with the developers, functional experts, and end users to deliver technical solutions to meet the needs of the NYU community. Jeff has over 15 years of experience in implementing and maintaining enterprise systems. Steve Swinsburg is the founder of Flying Kite, a software house based in Canberra, Australia, specializing in custom development for Sakai. Steve has over 10 years' experience in developing with the Sakai CLE and has supported many universities in rolling out successful implementations of Sakai, Sakai across the globe. He's a core developer on Sakai and is the current PMC Vice Chair. He was also an Apereo Foundation board member for 2 years and a recipient of the Sakai Foundation Fellows Award. So that is our distinguished panel for today. Before I turn over the presenter controls, let me just shoot out a couple quick polls. The first one is sort of one that I do quite often just to see who we've got in the audience today. So if you could take a moment to just let us know what your primary role is at your institution or organization. I'll give folks just a couple seconds to fill that out. Okay, going once, going twice. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share that information out. Looks like most of our attendees today are either information technology or instructional support design. We've got a few administrators, a few faculty, and a few other, but it looks like the bulk of our folks are kind of hands-on with the technology, so that's good to know. Now our second poll, let me go ahead and launch that one, is what gradebook do you currently use if you're using a Sakai gradebook? So there's the core Sakai gradebook, which is the one that's part of core Sakai. There's Gradebook 2, which is a contrib tool. And I put a couple other options for those of you who don't fit into a cookie cutter category. If you're not sure, maybe your institution has renamed your gradebook and you're not sure which version it is, that's an option for you. Or if you don't use the gradebook at all for whatever reason, there's another option. So if you haven't yet voted, please go ahead and cast your vote. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share it out. And it looks like most of our folks, more than half, are using the core gradebook. And then about 37% are using Gradebook 2. So that's kind of a good number to know about. I know that the work that's being done is sort of with the core gradebook, but it's replicating a lot of the functionality of Gradebook 2. So I'm sure those of you that are using Gradebook 2 that are thinking about switching, this should be pretty informative for you. So let me go ahead and hide the poll, and I'm going to turn it over to Kyle and the rest of our team here presenting. So Kyle, you should have presenter access now.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Wilma. So this is Jeff Pasch from NYU. So today we'll be talking about the Gradebook Enhancements Project. A few months ago, we gave a presentation on the Gradebook project during the Sakai virtual conference. So today we'll be providing an update on our progress. So the project represents a collaboration between NYU, Notre Dame, Asahi Net International, and Longsight. So these schools and vendors have contributed to the project both in terms of dollars, in input, and also in some cases in personnel. I wanted to point out that the Gradebook project is one of 3 community projects that are currently underway, and that includes LEAP, the Lessons Project, STEP for Samigo, and the Gradebook project. And then there are some additional projects that are either under consideration or are being explored, and that includes the Rally project, which is around accessibility, and there's some, interest in a wikis integration as well. So I just wanted to show how this fits into the larger group of community projects. So today I'll talk briefly about the scope of the project, some of our guiding principles around it as well. Then Kyle is going to provide a demo of the gradebook as it stands today. After that, we'll talk about our project methodology, and the tech team will give some details about the implementation. So first on scope. So we wanted to commit to a fairly tight scope for this project because we definitely wanted to get it in for Sakai 11. So the first element of that is spreadsheet entry. And this speaks to easier grade entry and easier modification of grades. Spreadsheet entry is something that's also present in many other LMS gradebooks. Secondly, we wanted to consolidate and simplify the import-export functionality. So in the current gradebook, this exists in many different places in the interface, and we saw users having difficulty with this in user research and user testing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And finally, especially with the introduction of spreadsheet entry, we wanted to ensure that we're creating a gradebook that is accessible and that provides a good overall user experience. So that's the core of the scope of this project. I also wanted to mention just some of our guiding principles, things to keep in mind as we see the demo, which will happen very, very soon. So we wanted to build on the current Sakai gradebook in different ways, both technically, and also we wanted to ensure an easy transition for users, and ways that we are doing that. We're sticking to current terminology in the current gradebook. For example, we still use gradebook item, and then we retain some elements of the current UI where it makes sense. And again, you'll see that in the demo. Secondly, we wanted to aim for no loss of functionality in the current gradebook. So simply first, do no harm. Next, we wanted to try to have minimal or no changes to the back end. And Steve can talk about that later in the presentation and what the advantage of that. And finally, we wanted to think about accessibility and user experience from the start of the project, not something that we tried to add in later. And we had great help from an external vendor that we used in this regard. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Kyle, and he will show you the gradebook.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so for the purposes of this demo, we're going to be actually looking at a real live version of the new gradebook. And when there's functionality that isn't yet in place, we'll just also be relying on a few high-fidelity wireframes. So first, I'm going to go ahead and go over to an instance of Sakai. And here we have the current core gradebook, or as we've been sort of informally, unofficially referring to it as Gradebook Classic. Yes. And here you can see that we have a number of different items in place and some scores associated with this. And the reason I wanted to point this out, first of all, is that as Jeff was just mentioning, the new gradebook relies on the same infrastructure, the same backend as the core gradebook. So all of the information, all the data that I have in place within this gradebook is also reflected in the new gradebook. So let's go ahead and take a look. Here it is. So as you can see, a spreadsheet really dominates the primary default view within the new gradebook. We want to be able to make it very easy for folks to be able to see all the items in their gradebook and be able to very easily enter scores for it. And before getting into the actual specifics of the interface, I also want to point out that another goal with the gradebook was to try and minimize and consolidate all the various options that previously appeared over a bunch of different menus in the gradebook. In the core gradebook, you can have up to 7 different menu screens that appear along the top. And if, for example, in the new gradebook, you have a TA in place and want to be able to grant permissions to them, the maximum number of screens that you will see in the new gradebook is 4. So we'll see how that consolidation occurs as we look through the interface here. So let's start taking a look at the way that the spreadsheet works. So on the very far left here, we see some student information. So we see a column that displays all the students in our course. And then next to that, you see a course grade column. So these columns are actually fixed. As I scroll through the rest of the gradebook, these will stay in place, which gives me a sense of place and allows me to have some relation to the rest of the items as I work through them. Now, of course, the rest of these columns here then correlate to gradebook items. So in the core gradebook, what is normally just on a different row or line now gets displayed as a column. And all the information that displayed within the current gradebook's gradebook items screen now shows up within the column header for these various items. So we can see here that we have our item title displaying. We have the average score as well as the maximum score available for that item. And then below that, we have the due date where it's applicable. And you'll notice as we move through here that there are also some icons that appear in the header for these columns. So we want to be able to make this very glanceable so that as you scroll through your gradebook, you can see various settings that you have in place for these items. So here, for example, for homework 2, as I hover over this, I can see that this gradebook item is not included in course grade calculation. I can see that this is actually a little calculator icon. I can also see if an item is not released to students as well. And over here, we have a plus icon for EC homework, denoting that this particular item is an extra credit item. So as we look over back here, we can also see that there's an icon that appears next to the title for homework 1. And this is denoting that this particular item is actually coming from another tool in Sakai. So here, for example, we have a tool coming from the assignments tool. So as you get different items coming from assignments, tests and quizzes, lessons, forums, you will see the icon for that particular tool showing up next to that item's name. And as we move forward with development, we'll also have some additional interface cues that will show you whether an item, for example, is editable or not, since it's coming from another tool. Okay. So as you look through this spreadsheet interface, you'll also notice that there are a number of little drop-down arrows that appear. And this is because we tried to take different elements that would normally be on different menus and contextualize them within the spreadsheet where it makes sense. So as we look through these, we can see that there are drop-downs in the column headers. If I were to select this, it would allow me to be able to edit this item's details. Within the cells themselves, if I were to select the drop-down, I can view the grade log for this particular cell, so to be able to see a history of what this particular student scored for this particular item. And I can also view or edit the comments for this particular cell. So as I enter comments, there will actually eventually be a little comment bubble icon that will appear as well within cells that have these comments in place. Moving back over to the course grade column, while we don't currently have this in place, this will eventually have the features that were previously available in the course grades view within the gradebook. So it'll have, for example, the ability to override course grades. Additionally, we're going to be implementing a new feature which will allow you to be able to determine whether students see a point value for the final course grade, a letter grade for the final course grade, points, letter grade, and there's a third option, points, letter grade. Well, we'll be able to have these, percentage, thank you. So we'll be able to have those options, so you can choose any combination that you would like to display there as well. Okay, so those are the basics of the actual spreadsheet layout. Now let's actually take a look at how we would interact with this spreadsheet. So I first want to show how you would add a gradebook item and then how you could then start grading within the spreadsheet. So as you might guess, adding a gradebook item is pretty easy because it's the one button that appears on this screen. So we wanted to be able to maintain existing conventions in the gradebook where it was applicable. And adding a gradebook item is something that people do a lot within the gradebook. We want to be able to make sure that they could retain that familiarity. So if I select this, it'll take me to a screen where I can then add the details for that item. But instead of leaving the gradebook interface, if I select Add Gradebook Item, it's going to actually open a modal window or a lightbox window. So this allows me to maintain a sense of place within the spreadsheet. And then once I create items, I can know that once I fill out this detail, let me go ahead and exit out here, it will appear on the very far right of my spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet will actually scroll, so it'll show me the item that I just created. Pretty easy. Now, as far as actually entering grades, that's the real meat and potatoes of the gradebook. We wanted to make sure that we made it as simple, as intuitive, and dare I say, as enjoyable as possible for people to be able to use. So we tried to also stick with conventions that you find in other spreadsheet applications, Excel, Google Sheets, Apple Numbers, for example. So let's see how that would work. If I click into a cell, I'll see the total points available for that cell. Then I just have to enter a value, and I can either click Enter or click out of that cell, and that's it. It's a very simple process. I think we need to see it again, actually. So I'm going to go ahead and click into another cell, add another score, and this time, if I click Enter, just like with any other spreadsheet application, it's going to move me down further within the column, so I can very easily navigate through these rows. I can also use Tab if I'd like to be able to move forward within a row, or I can use Shift-Tab to move back. And of course, I also have my arrow keys that I can use to move through the various cells within my spreadsheet interface. And you might have noticed when I was entering these scores, there's no Save button anywhere in sight. And that's because the spreadsheet is automatically saving each cell's value as I enter it, which makes it very easy for folks to be able to use it. As we move further along in development, we will also have a status notification that shows up at the top of the screen, similar to what you get with Google Docs, as a matter of fact, which will show you that things have been saved successfully, or if for some reason there was an error in saving, it would tell you what the error was, and there will also be visual clues in the interface guiding you to the cell that produced that particular error. So that's how easy it is to use the gradebook. Let's take a look at some of the other features that are available within this spreadsheet, though. So one feature we discovered was very handy for folks when we were doing user research was the ability for users to be able to pull up a summary for an individual student. They would frequently want to be able to see grades just for that student, or they would even be sitting with that student and want to show them their grades. Of course, when they did that, they didn't want the student to be able to see anyone else's grades too. And we actually encountered one use case where someone was holding a piece of paper up in front of their monitor to be able to hide other students' grades. We think we can do something a little bit more high-tech than that, though. So while it's not in place here yet, let me go ahead and switch to another wireframe, and we can show you what this is going to look like. Okay, so here we have a high-fidelity wireframe. If I wanted to be able to view a student summary for a given student, all I will need to do is within the students column, click on their name, and it's going to pull up this summary view, and it's also going to obscure all the information for any other students. This allows me to sit with a student or just as an instructor to work through and see all of that student's information. And we're also investigating the possibility of having instructor notes, so notes that you could provide for a student that are separate from individual item comment notes that you would provide. So we think that'll be a handy feature for folks. So moving back to the spreadsheet here. Of course, using a spreadsheet is only really helpful if you can work with it in a way that makes sense, especially if you have a lot of items or a lot of students in your class. So with that in mind, we provided some features to be able to personalize your view of the gradebook. So let's start with sorting. Within the students column, we are by default sorted by last name, comma, first name. However, if you wanted to, you could also change that sorting type to be first name. So if I click on the drop-down within that particular student column, I can choose to sort by first name, and then it will change to first name, last name. And it's one way that we can change the sorting type. But you can also change the sorting order as well. So if I were to click on the students column title, I will then change from being an ascending order to a descending order. Of course, I can also do that in any other column as well. If I click on any other column's title, I can create an ascending or descending sort order for the scores within that particular column. In addition to sorting, we also have filtering as well. So you'll have the ability to filter by section or group. So if you wanted to be able to limit your view of the gradebook to a given section or group, you may do that via a drop-down menu. And if you wanted to be able to filter to a given student, you can also type the student's name and be able to get a dynamic live filtering view. It'll be wildcard friendly, meaning that as I type, the results will dynamically update as I'm typing. So I have a student in my class. I can't remember her last name. I know her first name is Jane. I start typing that in, and it's going to automatically start limiting my search as I filter. So that's one way that you can limit your gradebook down to the specific users that you want to grade. But there's also some functionality in place for the various items, because you can have a lot of items in your gradebook. First and foremost amongst these is the ability to be able to actually drag and drop and choose the ordering of your gradebook items however you'd like. So as I click and drag on an item, I can just move it wherever I would like, and it will automatically move the scores along with it, and that item will then be saved in that position. It's persistent, meaning that I can update this page, leave, come back, and this ordering will be saved for me. We also have a few other features that will make it easy to be able to see the category groupings as well as limit the number of items that you're seeing at any given time within your gradebook. So for that functionality, I'm going to jump back over to another wireframe and we can take a look at that. Okay. So here we have another high-fidelity wireframe, and what we have in place here are just our various items. However, since there is the ability to create weighted categories within your gradebook, we wanted to be able to show that within the spreadsheet view, be able to show what category various items belong to, as well as if you're doing category weighting, the various category subtotals. So if you select the option to group by category, you're going to see this very nice interface where the columns will then be grouped together by the category that they belong to. You'll see what the category is, as well as if it's weighted, the percentage of that category. And you'll see some nice color coding occur, It makes it very easy to distinguish which categories these various items belong to. You'll also be able to drag and drop within these categories. And you'll see a category subtotal if you're doing categories with weighting. That'll show you the various subtotals for a given category appearing to the right of that category. So in addition to being able to group by category, we'll also have the menu that we have here to be able to show or hide grade items. So for those of you that use Google Calendar, if you belong to a lot of different calendars, sometimes your interface can get really cluttered with a lot of different events from a lot of different calendars. But you know that you can go over to the left and you can just click the various calendars that you want to be able to hide. So you'll see the same sort of interface in play here when we select Show Hide Grade Items. We see a list of all of our categories as well as all the items within those categories. And you'll also see boxes with colors corresponding to their category coloring. So if I want to be able to hide a given category or an item within a category, I just have to click on it. So here I can hide all of my forums, all of my homework, and I can choose to just display the midterm. And that makes it very easy for me to be able to narrow down my items, grade only the item I want. I can also choose to show all or hide all as well. So once I'm done, I can show all my items to be able to get back to my full view of the gradebook. And you can see that as I start hiding items, I also get a very clear message telling me that there are, in fact, items hidden within my current gradebook view. Okay, so heading back to our interface here, that about does it for the actual spreadsheet view of the gradebook. Do we want to stop to see if there's any questions for a moment?
Okay, we have had a few questions that have come in. Let me see here. The first one was, will there be any work done to connect forums with the gradebook? For example, if I create a new assignment, gradebook entry is created. When I create a new forum, I have to create the forum first and then link it to the gradebook entry that's already existing.
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, we just had a user at NYU asking about that. So it's not in the current scope. What we wanted to do is sort of get the basic framework in place first, but we've also kept track of those types of needs, and a more consistent integration with the gradebook across the different tools has come up. So depending on when Sakai 11 rolls out, that's definitely a need that's farther towards the top, and if we can go after those stretch goals, we certainly will try to.
Is there going to be any changes to when you're grading within, say, assignments or tests and quizzes? Is it all working pretty much the same? It's just sending the data to the new version of the gradebook?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, we haven't changed, with this, we haven't changed how it integrates with the other tools.
Okay, and it's a similar question related to tests and quizzes, so you've kind of already answered, but any changes to how it syncs with tests and quizzes? Now it doesn't let you assign a quiz to an already created gradebook item, and it doesn't like it if you create a new item from a test and quiz if you have a manually created item with the same name.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't changed it, but I mean those are all good points, and because, like I said, this desire to have more consistency in the way that the tools integrate with the gradebook is out there, and it has kind of popped up to the top. If there is time, that's one we would definitely like to tackle, whether it's in the current project or maybe in an additional phase or an add-on project.
Is there a way to roll back any changes if an after-the-fact error is discovered?
Not currently.
Okay, and we'll take one more for right now so we don't interrupt the flow too much. Import item and import the whole gradebook require slightly different spreadsheet formats. Is that any different now?
That's a great question, and it's a beautiful lead-in to the next part of Kyle's demo, because that's exactly what he's going to talk about.
Excellent. I stopped on a good one.
You're good. You should do this for a living, Wilma.
Okay, great. Yes, so why don't we actually talk about import-export? So yes, import-export as it currently exists in the core gradebook can be a little bit confusing at times. There are two different processes that work very differently. One of them has you be able to update and import the entire spreadsheet that you're uploading, as well as create any new items, but you can't selectively choose which items you'd like to be able to import. The other process allows you to be able to choose one item at a time that you'd like to be able to import, but you can't create new items or select multiple items that you'd like to be able to import. So we really wanted to be able to combine those two processes and make it very simple and easy to use. So if I take a look at the import-export as it shows up in the new gradebook, the first screen is very similar to what we've had in the past. So you'll be able to download a blank template or a full gradebook that you can use. So a blank template is just going to contain some basic formatting to assist you with creating items, whereas the full gradebook is going to contain everything that you'd like to be able to use. So I'm going to go ahead and download the full gradebook here. And then, of course, I could update scores or add new items to that template. And now I'm going to go ahead and import it. And this is where we're going to see some magic happen. So I'm going to choose a file that I'm going to upload. And then when I click continue, it's going to actually analyze the contents of that gradebook spreadsheet template, and then we'll see what happens here. So it identifies the various items within that spreadsheet. It tells me whether or not an item has comments associated with it, and I see the comments nested next to it. I can see the point value for that item, but most importantly, I see status showing up here. So because I haven't actually edited this spreadsheet at all, the status for all of these is NA. However, if I had updated scores for any of these items, I would see update showing up as the status. Additionally, if I'd created a new item, say homework 5, and I had comments for it as well, I would see two new items, homework 5 and homework 5 comments, and the status would be new for that. Of course, I'm also seeing since homework 1 is coming from the assignments tool, it's not allowing me to be able to update that item because it knows that's coming from the assignments tool. So I can selectively choose which items I'd like to import, or I could just select all of them. And when I click next, if I have any new items that I'm going to be creating, it's going to actually then guide me through the process of setting up those items. In the past, with the core gradebook, if you created new items, they were just created, and then you would have to go back and edit them after the fact. With this, it takes you through a very streamlined process where you're ensured that you are setting them up the way you would like before you complete the import process. So we think this is going to be a very simple and easy workflow for people to use with Gradebook import. So just very briefly to touch on the other screens that we have within the Gradebook as well. Settings is also going to be dramatically simplified because we've contextualized so many of the various options that are previously existing in other screens. So if I were to go into the settings here, we have basically 3 expandable menus. We have our grade release rules, which is where we can determine if released grades are visible to students and if the final course grade is visible to students. Then we have our categories and weighting, where we can set up categories or weighting if we'd like. And we have our grading schema, where we can determine what is being used to calculate final course grades. And that's it. We also have our permissions screen, which is more or less identical to what currently exists in the gradebook for providing grading permissions to teaching assistants. Okay, so I think that pretty much concludes the demo. I'll hand it back over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Kyle. So a few things I'll mention about the demo. And Kyle mentioned and really demonstrated that this is still a work in progress. So there are instances where we jump over to a prototype to show the functionality that isn't built in yet. But we think that this should give you a good idea of the basic structure of the new gradebook. Some of the things that are coming, Kyle talked about, indicators that the gradebook is saving, and that's something that we think is very important, both, something very clear at the top to let you know that's saving, and even some indicators within the cells, because that will be a big change for folks not to be clicking a button to commit those changes. So we recognize that. In terms of accessibility, there's going to be work on the color contrast, so you'll see some of those, very light grays. So that's, yet to come. So over the coming months, you'll see that. One thing about Wilma mentioned Gradebook 2. I mean, we have Jim Mezzanotte, a Gradebook 2 expert on the team. So we've we had been looking at Gradebook 2 and different types of features. Our aim isn't really to replicate all the features within Gradebook 2, but we want to take definitely some of the spreadsheet characteristics from that, and and other features, where it makes sense. But we're not looking to do a sort of one-to-one match of the functionality. One of the reasons we wanted to make the spreadsheet import-export process much easier is because there are some crazy things that people want to do in Gradebook that, frankly, it's just going to be easier to do it in Excel or Google spreadsheets, some calculations, and import them back in. So that's one way that we address that. Okay, so I wanted to talk briefly about our overall approach. So the first point is user research. And so we did this through directly observing faculty and their use of the current gradebook, but also by looking at data from faculty surveys and through our help tickets, just to get a sense of what the users are, how they're interacting with the current gradebook and what their needs are. Secondly, tech input from the start. So as we started talking to folks about the possibility of a project to improve the gradebook, we talked with maybe a majority of the folks on the PMC, just reaching out, kind of putting some ideas forward, and getting that initial input, and that was extremely valuable, and made sure that we weren't going off in a direction where what we produced wouldn't make it back into the core. Next, in terms of our approach, we broke the work up into different chunks. So you can see sort of the spreadsheet screen, for example, and so we didn't want to try to develop everything at once. So that's one way in which we've tried to remain agile. We also created a number of prototypes, and in fact, Kyle showed you one that we actually used with users. So clickable prototypes like that using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but also even paper prototypes, and we got those in front of users early. So we learned a great deal. So we didn't, go down, do a lot of work, and find out we've gone down the wrong path. And then next, competitive analysis. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We looked at a number of different grade books in learning management systems, and really looked for sort of the best of those, and what ideas we could glean instead of trying to come up with something by ourselves. But beyond that, we also looked at Google spreadsheets. We looked at Excel. In terms of how we want that spreadsheet entry to work. And as Kyle showed, we even looked at Google Calendar for inspiration. So for finding, conventions that folks are familiar with and that conventions that work. And then finally, which ties into the Agile approach I was referring to, user testing. Like I said, getting those prototypes in front of users early. And now that the actual gradebook is being built out, and we're getting it up to the point where we had that clickable prototype. We'll be getting it in front of users more, so we can get even additional feedback. And like I said, this it's a work in progress. So we'll see some level of change based on that. And we've had an external vendor to to help us in that regard. So the next piece, I want to turn over to Steve Swinsburg from Flying Kite, just to talk a little bit about the technologies that are being used in implementing the new gradebook.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.
Alrighty, so basically, in terms of the technical aspects of the project, we've decided to use Apache Wicket. This is a very mature framework. It's been around for about 10 years, and it has very active development and an open source community behind it, which is very important when we're doing this sort of work, because some of the other frameworks that have been used in Sakai in the past, they're not being developed anymore. So it turns out to be quite difficult to move forward with them, and especially with the richness of what we want to achieve with all the Ajax stuff and all the editable labels and fancy drop downs. That stuff just wouldn't be possible using an old framework. So being a new project, this is a ground-up rewrite of the front end. We're using the latest version of Wicket, which is Wicket 6. And I actually started using Wicket about 7 years ago. So I've grown really fond of it over the time. There's several other tools in Sakai that are using Wicket as well. So we're definitely not taking a new approach here. There's experience in the community for this particular framework. The great thing I like about Wicket is that it has a really good separation of concerns in regards to the presentation layer. So that's the HTML pages that you see on the screen, and the logic that renders those pages. So that's in Java, like the rest of the Sakai tools. And what this means is that we can take something that we've developed and basically throw it over the fence to someone else to make into something that someone would actually like to look at, but then not be blocked working on it or having any conflicts. So I knew that we would need to leverage this from the beginning, because we do have a couple of developer type people on the project with specialties in different areas. So Payten, who you'll hear from soon, I think, is more front-end focused, so in terms of the CSS, JavaScript, accessibility, things like that. Whereas myself, I'm more back-end focused, so the data layer, the business services, and connecting to Sakai services and grabbing all the data and processing it together. So Wicket has a very rich set of components. It contains forms and drop-downs, autocompletes, modal windows, editable labels, all sorts of different components, things that actually quite difficult to achieve just in standard HTML. These types of components are brought together, and you can just drop them onto a page, wire them all up to your data, and then you're good to go. One of the really good things about Wicket is that you can do Ajax calls, which are those dynamic asynchronous things that happen in the background without the screen changing. We can do those types of things from pure Java. So the logic itself is encapsulated in the actual Java code. So this ties into that whole separation of concerns. All the logic is in the one spot. In terms of the actual components, in the beginning we did look at using the in-method grid component from the Wicket Stuff project, which if you're familiar with how Sakai works, we have like a contrib project area and then the main project area. So the Wicket Stuff is kind of like the contrib part of Wicket. So it's a bunch of people who have created all these really useful components that people can use. They're not necessarily core, but they're more like an extension library. And what we found was that this is fine for a standard data table. The label is editable and it saves and everything like that is quite nice. But since we do have a number of components in each cell, so we've got the grade, we've got a little drop down, we're going to have icons, this was a little bit difficult to achieve with the in-method component. So in the end we ended up going with native Wicket, and we just built on top of some of the native components ourselves. The main part, as you've seen in the demo, is the editable label inside that spreadsheet type view with the cell being updated in the background. And that comes for free with the Wicket components that we're using. And what we found is that using the native components gives us a lot more flexibility with the raw HTML table cells that we end up with. And this is really important because we're adding accessibility attributes onto each of those cells. So we have access to the actual table cell underneath. In terms of the current code, So at the moment, as Jeff mentioned, we're aiming for no back-end changes. This may actually change as we go along, so don't quote me on this one. So for things like the grade comment logs, so at the moment you can update a grade and a comment, and the grade is versioned, so you can see a log of those changes, but the comment attached to a grade is not versioned. There's only one comment. So we would like to have the comment log being versioned as well, so we're going to need to do something about that one. And as Kyle mentioned in the demo, the instructor notes for the student. So when you click on the student and see the grade summary, the instructor notes feature, that actually doesn't exist at the moment. So we're going to need to do something about the storage of that data. So we have our own business logic layer within the tool. So this gets at all the data. It wraps the various Sakai services, so we're reusing the existing Gradebook service and obviously all of the information about the person who's logged in, information about students, instructor permissions and things like that. We collect all that data in this business logic layer, process it all, and then pass it back to the front end. Some of the information is additional information, so things like the sort order. So when you drag and drop one of those columns and you drop it, that actually fires off a request to store that order somewhere because the order is not stored. And we're currently leveraging the site and tool properties system of Sakai for storing some of that information. So perhaps as we get to these other features, perhaps we could use the same approach using site and tool properties. But again, this might change depending on the amount and type of data that we need to store. So as I mentioned with the drag and drop, we've built a couple of entity providers. So these are RESTful web services that sit in the background that the JavaScript on the front end can make a simple GET request or a POST request to, and this allows the front end to interact with the back end just through pure JavaScript. So the entity provider system already exists in Sakai. If you've heard of the project called Project Kitai, which is a whole bunch of RESTful web services across all of the tools, this is exactly the same approach. So it means that front-end interfaces like JavaScript can interact with that back end. So yeah, for setting the order, we fire off a request. Soon we'll be doing performance testing. So we'll be using some JVM profiling tools to check for any hotspots in terms of code being slow, too much time being spent in a certain area, and we're going to look to address those. But basically at the moment, it's just heads down implementing and finishing the features. So I'll hand back to Jeff.
Great, thanks a lot, Steve. And I think Payten has a few additions.
Yep.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Payten. Like as Steve alluded to, my primary role in this project has to mainly focus on the front end and develop the user interactions. So we're hoping to introduce some of the features that we see in our favorite spreadsheet and other data entry systems into this gradebook context. So I've been working with the HTML generated by the Wicket framework, as Steve mentioned. So I've been tinkering in there a little bit, but mostly I've been contributing JavaScript and CSS alongside the Wicket behaviors. So all the JavaScript that I've created, this bespoke JavaScript, is jQuery based, and I've made an effort to break up the JavaScript into functional areas. So hopefully this will make it easy to understand and debug and ultimately maintain in the future. Where possible, we've tried to reuse existing JavaScript frameworks that are already available here in Sakai. So these include jQuery UI for things like drag and drop, and Bootstrap for some of its styles, and some of its other JavaScript components. Regarding CSS, there will be some tool-specific styles for this, and as the iframes just disappear, all the styles will be scoped so not to bleed and affect other parts of the page. So that should all just work nicely. For all the tool-specific icons, we're also creating a font. So we're following in Morpheus's footsteps there and creating a font of SVG icons. So that's pretty much the technologies in the front end. I guess I was just going to mention that previous to this development starting, we did work on a lot of prototypes and wireframes that were workshopped with users and stakeholders, and they helped us define what might be possible in this context. We did collaborate with an external vendor, as Jeff mentioned, and they offered a great understanding. They were specialists in accessibility. They offered a great understanding of the accessibility concerns for such an interactive interface. So with accessibility in the forefront of our minds, we're now developing the tool and endeavoring to include a lot of these recommendations. And as Kyle demonstrated, our goal is to have a completely keyboard navigable interface. And as we move forward, we're hoping to introduce also our ARIA compliant markup. So we're really hoping to make this tool as screen reader friendly as possible. And then with that, I think I'll pass back to Jeff, unless there's any questions.
Great. Thanks, Payten. Yeah, so I think we just have a couple more, I think we just have one more slide. Oh, great, it's the question slide. But actually, before the question slide, because I think that'll go on, let's go forward one for folks who might have to leave early. So, so there is a Sakai wiki page. So if you search for the Gradebook Enhancements, that's the name of the page there. So you can find more information there, and we'll be updating that over the coming weeks. And then contact information you can send to the project team if you have any questions, etc. And so, yeah, at this point, I think we can go to questions.
Okay, we actually have a lot of questions in the queue, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to all of them. Hopefully we can hit on most of them now. Several people asked about iRubric integration. Is that still going to be possible in this version of the gradebook?
It's a good question. Steve, do you know about that? Not to put you on the spot. Steve,
yeah, unfortunately I don't, so I'll need to do a bit of research into that.
Yep. Yeah, we'll have to.
Sorry, did you hear that response there?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Will the new Gradebook and Gradebook Classic coexist on Sakai 11, or will data be imported into the new Gradebook in prior term sites?
Yeah, so at this point, the idea is for them to, they're definitely able to coexist. The final determination, needs to be made if they'll coexist in 11. But I think that's the direction that we're pushing towards and moving towards. Steve, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, that's right. We've definitely built it so they can run side by side. Any changes that we make in terms of the back end would be completely compatible. So yeah, if we did end up needing to touch the back end services, then those shouldn't affect the other gradebooks. So yeah, side by side, definitely.
Yeah. And Wilma, one thing I wanted to say, I mean, we can at least most of us, if not all of us, on the project team can stay past the hour if people have additional questions.
Oh, great. We might have to take you up on that. Okay. We had several questions related to Gradebook 2. One person's asking, why should I use this instead of Gradebook 2?
I think Jim is probably, he's our Gradebook 2 guru, and he might be able to speak to that.
Sure I can. I think, and I can just kind of put this out there that I've talked about this with this team, is that I think for a lot of people if you're using Gradebook Classic or the original Gradebook, the idea of having an interactive, this kind of interactive spreadsheet is fantastic. It's something that most, the people who use Gradebook 2 are already using. I think in my experience with this project is that it's a really nice interface. I won't say that it works better, because we won't get into that issue, but I will say that I think that it's taking the same interface model of this interactive spreadsheet and kind of, as Jeff and Kyle have mentioned, kind of taking cues from other spreadsheet solutions and other gradebooks, and kind of moving it into a more modern interface. And also we just mentioned that in terms of talking about competitive analysis, when the team was first looking at designs, that the idea was that look at Gradebook 2, look at gradebooks from other LMS, and kind of look at what would be the best of all of those. So I think that's what I would say in terms of wanting to use this one, that it's just going to be a better overall experience, I think, for using a spreadsheet if you're already used to using it.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we see the gradebook evolving over time. We wanted to make sure that number one, that we could get it in for Sakai 11, and that we got what we got into Sakai 11, that we got the basic framework correct, and then add a little bit more functionality beyond what's in the current gradebook, but just getting the spreadsheet entry in there, making it tight, making it secure, and getting that import-export fixed up. Those were the core points, but over time you may see some additional functionality come in as it makes sense.
Jeff, I'll just add one more thing too, just for those who are using Gradebook 2, is that again stressing the idea that this is kind of the first stage, and that there will be more improvements, and this is kind of an evolution. So I think for sure, pretty much there are going to be some things that aren't going to be quite a one-to-one feature parity with the new Gradebook and Gradebook 2. But I think that eventually you can expect to see most of that, come into the quote-unquote new Gradebook, because the team is definitely aware of all the different things that Gradebook 2 does now and that other Gradebooks do, and so those are kind of all, on the to-do list for things to come as this new version of the Gradebook gets improved.
Just as kind of a corollary to that, do you have any information on the future status of Gradebook 2?
I don't want to speak for the Gradebook 2 team, but my understanding is, and one of the reasons that A&I is, it's one of the big reasons that we're getting involved with this, is I don't think there's going to be a lot of future development with the Gradebook 2 tool. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn with the Gradebook 2 team, but I don't think there's going to be a real kind of robust roadmap for further development. I could be wrong about that, but I think at this point that's kind of where things are heading.
Let's see. There was one other Gradebook 2 question. Gradebook 2 has a submit final grade feature that you can extend locally to submit final grades to the SIS. Will this version of the Gradebook have a similar type of feature?
So we actually use a grade poll feature here at NYU with the current Gradebook. So the APIs are out there and available. I'm not sure about, I know that there are different sort of approaches, pulling versus pushing, but the capabilities are there. Steve, I don't know if you have more to say about that.
Yeah, so because we're using the exact same backend service as Gradebook 1, the data access is certainly there. I haven't seen the submit final grades feature. It's likely something that could be baked into the actual Gradebook service itself. So if it's possible to get at the data, then we can certainly get that data and send it somewhere.
Okay, thank you. We had a few people asking what the student view of grades looks like. I wonder if you have a screen or a mock-up you could show of what that student view might look like. I know we saw the view where the instructor would be able to show to the student. Is that basically what they see?
Yeah, and I think Kyle can speak to that. Maybe we can jump back to that. Yeah.
Sure. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Yes. So we think that the student view is going to look more or less identical to how it looks right now in Sakai 10. So if I pull up the instructor summary view for that student, this is very similar to what students already see in Sakai 10.
Yep, exactly.
And I noticed you mentioned that you're taking around that instructor notes feature. Is there going to be a way to have notes that are not visible to the student?
Yeah, so that's the goal, and we've in different wireframes we've called it private instructor notes just to get that point across and that they're not comments. So yeah, so on these notes will sit at the student level, not at an individual item level, and they will be private, just to the instructor about that student.
Okay, great. Let's see, we had a question about a 4.0 scale. How well will this calculate course grades on a 4.0 scale?
It won't be different from the current gradebook, from the current Sakai gradebook. I can't say much beyond that. I don't know if anyone else on the team wants to take that.
Yeah, I can say. So again, we're using the exact same backend. So all we're doing on the front end is updating the grades for each assignment that's sitting in the, or for each grade item that's sitting in the spreadsheet, and the course grade is then calculated in exactly the same way as the original gradebook does.
Can you manually sort categories? And also, will there be a way to add attendance from signups to the gradebook?
So what we can say about category is that our goal is to, this might not exactly be answering the question, but two kinds of sorts of items. One, if you're not grouped by category, to be able to sort the items in any order you want. If you are grouped by category, to be able to sort the items within category. So you wouldn't be able, so Kyle, if you jump over to the prototype and yeah, so there we go. So you can see by that color coding, and we can have some other demarcation too, that shows those items within a category. You'd be able to sort those in the order you want, and we would retain that sort order. It would be saved. Now to order categories, right now, Kyle, it's being sorted alphabetically now, isn't it, Kyle?
It is, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we haven't built in that ability to say, I want homework before forums, that sort of thing.
Okay, there was kind of two questions in one on that particular.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, what was the
about
other?
the attendance from signups. Is that something that's on the radar? To be able to add attendance into the gradebook.
It's not in the scope of this project, but it sounds great.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are interested in something along those lines, but it definitely sounds like it'd be out of scope for this. How many students show up in the listing view? Is there like a default, or does it just keep adding them in as you scroll?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I think the mock-up that, or the prototype that Kyle was just on, I mean, I think that's more indicative of what we're envisioning. So yeah, that, and as Steve was saying, we have more performance testing to do, but yeah, that it would continue to scroll, and then as we do that performance testing, we have to see what are we going to do, an infinite scroll, if it's a huge grade book, how are those going to load, but yeah, it's at this point we're letting them all load up. Steve, do you want to say anything more about it?
Yeah, no, that's about it. So I think performance testing will dictate the approach that we're able to do.
Yep.
Okay. Is it possible to show how instructors would add comments? Because they were saying that a lot of times instructors lose comments because it doesn't automatically save their work, but it looks like in here you're not really having to save as you go. It just kind of does it for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Kyle's just now clicking on where they would do view, edit, comment. We don't, like other pieces, we don't have this fully built out. but that would bring up a screen, and then it will log you out like it just did. So yeah, then it'll bring up a screen. We have to decide whether at the point at which they enter comments, whether there's going to be a button. It'll bring it. It most likely will have it come up in like a light box, and then there'd be a button in which they'd have to sort of commit that change. We think that's the approach that we would take. And if they don't hit save and try to exit out, then they would get some kind of warning message.
Okay. Is it possible to have weighted items within a weighted category?
Not in this. Not in this incarnation. We didn't attack that one, but we have seen that question before, and like we said, it's an evolving thing, and as we look at other requests, we see sort of what will bubble to the top and be the most important for folks.
And I'm assuming if the functionality is the same as the current gradebook, then this is probably no, but will we be able to enter grades in the gradebook and have them update tests and quizzes?
No. No, but again, that comes up. It comes up a lot. The integration between the gradebook and the tools and the capabilities there. So I think that's ripe for exploration.
I would also, this is Jim Mezzanotte again, I would also add, you do have to keep in mind that for the most part, for, I don't know the technical details, but for any integrations that involve other tools, part of the issue is that something has to happen on both ends. So that's part of what would probably have to happen is that some kind of work would have to involve tests and quizzes as well. It's just something on the gradebook side.
Yeah. So if there's a tests and quizzes community project out there, maybe we can talk with them.
Yeah, that would be good. Let's see. I'm trying to just filter through some of the other questions so that we can get to a few more. I don't want to keep you too late. We had one comment about the permissions screen. They said it was confusing. Could there be a list of current rules showing up on that screen?
Interesting. Yeah, with permissions, we haven't changed it from we haven't changed this from the current gradebook at all. And like I said, we kind of attacked this in chunks, and we started with the spreadsheet and went on to import export. Now those two are kind of running concurrently. So we haven't given too much thought around the permissions. There are only 4 permissions in the current gradebook, but as we move on, if there are opportunities to in some way make that more rich, we may consider that.
And is it group section aware, the greater permissions?
It's not group aware. Well, actually, the permissions, yes. So just like in the current gradebook, you could say I want to give this TA permissions to this. Actually, if you just click that, Kyle. I don't know if we have one in there.
Which one? I'm sorry.
That right there.
Oh, I don't think we've got anything.
We don't have one in. Okay, no, that's fine. So yeah, so they will be able to say which TA can grade which section, just like before.
Okay. Let's see. Will the zero all null and ungraded items feature still be available? I think it was called calculate grades where it's in zeros for anything that's ungraded.
Yeah. Yep. It'll still be there. It'll still be there. We're like I said, we're not going to take away functionality.
Okay. Let's see here. I think those are most of the questions. I know, Jeff, you've got the question pane. If you see anything else that I missed that's not too fine-grained, I know we're already 10 minutes over, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If there is a question that we didn't get to, please feel free to email me, and I can forward it to Jeff and the rest of the folks if they have a chance to answer it offline. But I do want to end on one final question, which I thought was kind of a good wrap-up question. It was, congratulations for all the work. Is there a test server where we could see some of this? And what's the target date for getting it into trunk so that people can go and take a look at it?
Right. So we don't have it out for poking around now, but that is a goal for us over the coming months. In terms of when we get into trunk, Steve might be able to have a better sense of the state of the code and when we may shoot for that.
Yeah, I think we're a little way off having that in trunk. I think the schedule for Sakai 11 is going to be a little bit later this year, so we do have a little bit more time, and I think it's important to get everything really nice before we put it into trunk, because it can get a little more difficult to work with once we once the Sakai 11 branch gets made and things like that. There's more complexities around managing the code. So I think if we maintain our current velocity on this development, then we can look at getting into trunk sort of in the next couple of months, I guess.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate this demo and getting to see what it's going to look like. It's pretty exciting. I appreciate you taking time to answer all the questions that we were able to get to. Again, if we didn't get to your question, I apologize, but we can follow up offline if you still have pending questions hanging out there. So thanks again to all of our presenters, and thank you all for attending. And hopefully we'll see you next month. We're going to be doing a session update on the LEAP project, so you'll get to hear a little bit more about the lessons enhancement and what that's where that is right now. So hopefully you'll join us. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Wilma.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.